The Interstellar Defense Institute existed in that peculiar intersection of military necessity and bureaucratic compromise that seemed to define most galactic institutions. Perched on orbital platform Zenith 9, itself anchored in the gravitational sweet spot between three binary star systems, the Institute represented the combined security interests of 47 member species who had mostly stopped shooting at each other long enough to realize they needed professional soldiers who could work together without immediately trying to kill one another. Progress, the galactic community called it, though anyone who had attended the budget meetings might use different terminology involving more profanity. The platform itself was a monument to practical engineering over aesthetic consideration. Whoever designed it had clearly been working from 47 different architectural blueprints simultaneously, while nursing a significant headache and a complete disregard for visual coherence. Training facilities jutted from the main structure like metallic growths, each section built to accommodate different species requirements. Aquatic combat tanks for the Selkarian forces, low-pressure environments for the methane-breathing Zoth Tal, and standard oxygen-nitrogen atmospheres for the boring majority who insisted on breathing the same air their ancestors had. What made Zenith 9 significant, beyond its truly unfortunate appearance, was its purpose. This was where the galaxy sent its military personnel to learn how to not die embarrassingly quickly when confronted with actual combat situations. The Institute offered everything from basic marksmanship to advanced tactical command, from small unit tactics to orbital assault coordination. It was prestigious, it was expensive, and it had a failure rate that would make most educational institutions deeply uncomfortable, but which military organizations considered acceptably ruthless. The social hierarchy at the Institute mapped directly onto physical capability, because while everyone pretended the galaxy had evolved beyond such primitive status structures, the reality was that soldiers respected people who could beat them in a fight. At the top of this informal pecking order sat the heavy worlders, species that had evolved on high-gravity planets where simply standing upright required more muscle mass than most civilizations developed in their entire evolutionary history. They walked through the corridors with the casual confidence of people who knew they could probably break everyone around them without significant effort. Below them came the medium-tier species, adequate strength, decent reflexes, respectable endurance. They formed the bulk of the student body and the majority of the instructor corps, perfectly competent, thoroughly professional, and entirely aware they would never achieve the legendary status of the heavy world elite. And then, at the bottom, were the lightweights. Species from low gravity, worlds from peaceful evolutionary paths, from environments that had never required them to develop impressive physical capabilities. They usually ended up in technical positions, logistics roles, intelligence analysis. Important work, certainly, but not the kind that earned respect in the combat training halls. Humans had arrived in this hierarchy approximately 15 years ago, when Earth had finally developed functional faster-than-light travel and stumbled into the wider galaxy with all the grace of a drunk teenager at a formal dinner. The galactic community had welcomed them with the sort of polite enthusiasm usually reserved for distant relatives you didn't actually want visiting. Diplomatically speaking, humans were exhausting. They asked too many questions, ignored too many established protocols, and had alarming tendencies toward what other species diplomatically termed creative interpretation of regulations. Militarily speaking, they were underwhelming. Earth was a 1.0 standard gravity world. Perfectly average, nothing special. Human physiology featured no natural armor, no redundant organs, no enhanced sensory capabilities, and a frankly embarrassing reliance on tools to compensate for their biological limitations. They were fragile, slow to heal, and possessed only 2 arms, which every combat instructor agreed was at least 2 arms short of optimal. Still, humans insisted on joining combat training programs, and the Interstellar Defense Institute, bound by its charter to provide equal opportunity to all member species, couldn't refuse them without triggering another round of those endless committee meetings that everyone hated. So humans were admitted, assessed, and usually washed out within the first few weeks when confronted with training regimens designed for species that could actually handle them. This was the status quo that Instructor Draxel Morvon had maintained for the past 12 years of his tenure at the Institute. And today, as he reviewed his roster for the new Advanced Combat Certification cycle, he intended to maintain it for at least 12 more. Draxel was a Corvathian, which meant he stood 8.5 feet tall, even with the slight forward hunch that his species favored for combat readiness. His homeworld operated at 2.3 standard gravities, an environment that had forged his species into living weapons over millions of years of evolutionary pressure. His musculature was dense enough to stop most small-caliber projectiles without armor. His hide, a mottled gray-green, was thick enough that he could walk through most hostile environments without environmental suits. His reflexes operated roughly 40% faster than galactic average. His strength was sufficient to bend structural steel with his bare hands. More importantly, he had spent 12 years proving it. His record was immaculate. 537 students trained, 0 fatalities, and a graduation rate of 68%, which was considered remarkably high for advanced combat certification. He had published extensively on combat biomechanics, species-based tactical deployment, and what he termed realistic capability assessment. 3 of his papers had been cited in military academies across 9 different species educational systems. His most recent work, Gravitational Evolution and Combat Effectiveness, a quantitative analysis, had sparked considerable academic debate and earned him both praise and criticism in roughly equal measure. The criticism, predictably, came mostly from the lightweight species who objected to his conclusion that high-gravity evolution produced objectively superior warriors. Draxel considered this criticism evidence that his thesis was correct. After all, if they could disprove it physically, they would have done so rather than complaining through academic journals. His teaching philosophy was straightforward. Honesty delivered through demonstration. Students learned their limitations by encountering them directly. This approach was brutal, occasionally resulted in medical interventions, and produced warriors who understood exactly what they could and could not accomplish in actual combat situations. Draxel made no apologies for this methodology. War was not kind to people who overestimated their capabilities, and he considered it his duty to provide that revelation in a training environment rather than a battlefield. He stood now in his office, reviewing the roster for today's incoming class. 23 students from 14 different species. Excellent diversity. Strong physical profiles across the board. This cohort showed real promise. His eyes tracked down the list. 3 Vorthians, solid heavy worlders with excellent close combat instincts. 4 Krellians, their chitinous armor and multi-limbed coordination making them natural assault specialists. 2 Theronian transfers from another program, already well-trained but seeking advanced certification. Several medium-tier species filling out the middle ranks. And then his eyes stopped at the last entry. Lieutenant Kira Vance, human. Earth Coalition Marines. Draxel's nostril slits flared in what might have been a sigh. Of course there was a human. The Earth Coalition had been increasingly aggressive about demanding their personnel receive fair evaluation in advanced programs, apparently unable to accept that fair evaluation consistently revealed their species' limitations. This would be the 4th human he had dealt with in his many years. The previous 3 had withdrawn from the program within 2 weeks after confronting the reality that their physiology simply could not compete at this level. He pulled up Lieutenant Vance's file, expecting the usual pattern. Adequate basic training scores, enthusiastic recommendations from human commanders who didn't understand galactic standards, and probably some notation about potential or determination or whatever. Other euphemism her species used for not actually qualified, but were sending them anyway. The file was different. Kira Vance, 28 standard years old, 7 years active service with Earth Coalition Marines. Combat deployments to 3 different conflict zones, all of them low-intensity peacekeeping operations, but still actual field experience. Qualified expert in 7 different weapon systems. Advanced certifications in zero-gravity combat, hostile environment operations, and close-quarters battle. Instructor qualification in hand-to-hand combat at the Earth Coalition training facility on Luna Station. And then, buried in her service record, a notation that made Draxel's eyes narrow. Specialized training, high-gravity adaptation program, Olympus Mons facility, Mars. Duration, 24 months. He had no idea what that meant. Probably some human training initiative, likely irrelevant to actual combat capability. The file also noted that she had requested access to Zenith 9's high-gravity training chambers upon arrival, which Draxel had denied. Humans had no business in those facilities. The 1.8 standard gravity environment would probably injure them, and he had no interest in explaining to Earth Coalition why their personnel were being sent home with compression injuries. Draxel closed the file and made a mental note to keep expectations low. He would treat Lieutenant Vance with the same professional courtesy he extended to all his students, which meant he would be absolutely honest about her limitations and provide opportunities for her to recognize them herself. If she withdrew from the program early, as her predecessors had, that was simply reality asserting itself. The morning briefing took place in Lecture Hall 3, a tiered amphitheater designed to accommodate the varying sizes and seating requirements of multiple species. Draxel stood at the center of the floor space, his bulk commanding attention without effort. The 23 students filed in, finding seats, arranging themselves with the unconscious hierarchy that always emerged in these settings. Heavy worlders toward the front, smaller species toward the back. Kira Vance entered last. She was, Draxel noted with professional detachment, entirely unremarkable by human standards. 5 feet 8 inches tall, medium build, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She wore standard Earth Coalition combat fatigues, gray and blue, tailored to fit but nothing fancy. Her movements were economical, controlled, suggesting decent physical training. Her expression was calm, neutral, giving away nothing. She also, he noticed, moved with slightly exaggerated care, as though she was concentrating on basic motor control. Probably nervous, understandable given the circumstances. Every eye in the room tracked her as she found a seat toward the middle section. Several students exchanged glances. A Vorthian in the front row, a massive specimen named Krell Talk, made a sound that might have been amusement or dismissal. With Vorthians, it was hard to tell. Draxel waited for everyone to settle before speaking. Welcome to Advanced Combat Certification. My name is Instructor Draxel Morvon. Over the next 12 weeks, you will undergo the most demanding combat training available in the Interstellar Defense Institute. The failure rate for this program is 32%. If you are not physically and mentally prepared for this challenge, you should withdraw now and save yourself the embarrassment. He paused, letting that sink in. Nobody moved. They never did at this point. It took a few days before students started recognizing their limitations. This program is built on a simple principle. Understanding your capabilities requires understanding your biology. Combat effectiveness is not determined by courage or determination, though those qualities have value. It is determined by physics, by evolution, by the environmental pressures that shaped your species over millions of years. He activated the holographic display, pulling up a three-dimensional model of a Corvathian, specifically himself. I am Corvathian. My homeworld operates at 2.3 standard gravities. This environment created evolutionary pressure toward dense musculature, reinforced skeletal structure, and cardiovascular systems capable of operating under extreme load. These are not advantages. They are necessities for survival. But they translate directly into combat capability in lower gravity environments like this station. He rotated the model, highlighting specific anatomical features. I can generate approximately 1/800 pounds of force in a standard punch. My dermis is 12 millimeters thick and can absorb impacts that would kill most species. My reaction time is 0.11 seconds from stimulus to physical response. These are measurable, quantifiable attributes. He swiped to another model, this one showing a Theronian. Theronians possess different advantages: four-armed coordination, natural armor plating, enhanced sensory perception. Their homeworld gravity of 2.1 standard G produced similar evolutionary pressures with different solutions. Another swipe, showing a Krellian. Krellians: chitinous exoskeleton, multi-limbed dexterity, compound visual systems allowing nearly 360-degree awareness. He continued through several species, each time highlighting their evolutionary advantages, their measurable capabilities, the specific ways their biology translated into combat effectiveness. The students took notes, their various appendages, tendrils, or manipulators, recording information in formats suited to their physiology. Then Draxel pulled up a human model. And then we have humans. He let the statement hang in the air for a moment. Humans evolved on a 1.0 standard gravity world. Perfectly average. They possess no natural armor, no redundant organs, no enhanced sensory capabilities beyond standard range. 2 arms limiting combat versatility, relatively thin dermis, fragile skeletal structure, vulnerable circulatory and nervous systems. He zoomed in on the human muscular system. Human muscle tissue is efficient for their environment, but lacks the density of high-gravity species. Their maximum striking force, even for trained individuals, typically ranges between 400 to 600 pounds, 1/3 of what a Corvathian can generate. Their reaction time averages 0.25 seconds, more than double mine. Their endurance is respectable, but not exceptional. Their height and mass put them in the lower middle range of galactic standards. Draxel turned to look directly at Kira, who was taking notes on a datapad, her expression unchanged. Furthermore, humans are newcomers to the galactic community. They have minimal experience with multi-species combat scenarios. Their military tradition is entirely based on fighting other humans, opponents with identical limitations. They are, to be completely frank, evolutionary middleweights attempting to compete in a heavyweight arena. He let that statement settle before continuing. This is not prejudice. This is biology. This is physics. These are the facts you must understand about yourselves and about each other if you are to survive actual combat situations. Kira raised her hand. Draxel felt a flicker of annoyance, but gestured for her to speak. Lieutenant Vance. Just a clarification question, sir. Her voice was steady, professional, with an accent Draxel couldn't quite place. Somewhere from Earth's northern hemisphere, perhaps. When you mention human striking force in the 400 to 600 pound range, is that calculated at Earth standard gravity or at station gravity? It was such an odd question that Draxel paused. The measurements are standardized across environments, Lieutenant. Why would the location of measurement matter? No reason, sir. Just wanted to understand the parameters. She made a note on her datapad. Continue, please. Draxel studied her for a moment, trying to detect sarcasm or challenge in her tone, but found nothing except polite attention. He continued with the lecture, moving into combat theory, tactical positioning, the importance of understanding both your capabilities and your opponent's capabilities. Standard material, well-rehearsed, delivered with the confidence of someone who had given this lecture dozens of times. 90 minutes later, he concluded, "We will now move to the practical training facility for initial assessments. Follow me." The migration from lecture hall to training facility followed the usual pattern. Students clustering by species, conversations buzzing about the lecture content, the usual mixture of nervousness and excitement that came with the first day of advanced training. Draxel led them through Zenith 9's corridors, past observation windows showing other training sessions in progress, past memorials to students who had died in the line of duty after graduating, past the administrative offices where bureaucrats did whatever bureaucrats did when they weren't making instructors' lives more difficult. The Combat Assessment Hall was exactly what its name implied. A large open space with reinforced flooring, multiple training circles marked out in different sizes, medical stations positioned at strategic intervals, and observation galleries running along the upper walls. As they entered, Draxel noticed the galleries were already occupied. Word had spread, as it always did. Other instructors, off-duty students, administrative staff who had nothing better to do, all of them gathering to watch the new cohort's first day. They were probably here to see the human fail. First-day assessments traditionally involved the instructor demonstrating proper technique against a volunteer student, and the betting pools usually focused on how quickly the demonstration would end. With a human in the class, the entertainment value was apparently too good to miss. Draxel suppressed his irritation. He didn't approve of the betting pools, though he couldn't actually prevent them. And he certainly didn't appreciate being treated as entertainment. But he also couldn't deny that today's assessment would likely be memorable for exactly the reasons the observers expected. "Form a line," he ordered, and the students complied, arranging themselves along one edge of the main training circle. He walked to the center, his footfalls echoing in the large space. Initial assessments serve multiple purposes. They establish baseline capabilities, identify areas requiring additional training, and demonstrate proper combat form. Today we will focus on basic striking technique and defensive positioning. He scanned the line of students. "I need a volunteer to assist with demonstration." Several hands, claws, and tentacles went up immediately. The Vorthian Krelltalk looked particularly eager, probably hoping to impress his instructor on the first day. Draxel almost selected him. Vorthians made excellent demonstration partners, being durable enough to take hits without injury while still being inexperienced enough to make teaching points clear. Then he saw Kira's hand, raised with the same calm professionalism she had demonstrated throughout the morning. The choice was obvious. Demonstrating technique against the human would drive home the lesson about physical limitations better than any lecture. It would be educational for everyone involved, particularly Lieutenant Vance herself, who would learn early what she was up against in this program. Quick, clean, professional. She would attempt a strike. He would easily deflect it, and everyone would have a clear understanding of the capability differential. "Lieutenant Vance," he said, "please step forward." She moved to the center of the circle with that same careful control he had noticed earlier, like someone concentrating on basic coordination. The other students shifted, murmuring among themselves. In the observation galleries, he could see people leaning forward, interested now. Kira stopped about 10 feet from him, awaiting instructions. "The purpose of this exercise," Draxel announced, projecting his voice to include both the students and the galleries, "is to demonstrate proper defensive technique against an incoming strike. Lieutenant Vance will attempt to strike me. I will demonstrate the correct defensive posture and movement, and we will analyze the exchange. This is educational, not competitive. Understanding your physical limitations is essential for survival. He settled into a ready stance, weight balanced, arms loose. Lieutenant, when you are ready, throw your best strike at my center mass. Do not hold back. I assure you, there is no risk of injury to me, and the exercise requires your full commitment to be educational. Kira nodded, then began removing her outer uniform jacket. Draxel frowned. Lieutenant, that's not necessary. She folded the jacket carefully and set it aside. Underneath, she wore a fitted undershirt, gray material that clung to her frame. And underneath that, clearly visible now, she wore some kind of additional garment. It looked like a vest made of dense fabric, with bulky sections around her torso, shoulders, and arms. She reached down and began unfastening the vest. Lieutenant? What are you doing? Draxel asked, his tone sharpening with irritation. Removing my training gear, sir. She pulled the vest off and let it drop. The vest hit the floor with a sound like a small meteorite impact. The reinforced flooring actually cracked slightly at the impact point. Every conversation in the hall stopped. Kira stretched her arms, rolling her shoulders, moving with suddenly fluid grace that was completely different from her earlier careful movements. Sorry, sir. I've been wearing that since arriving on station 3 weeks ago. Takes some adjustment when I take it off. Draxel stared at the vest on the floor, then at the human, then back at the vest. What is that? Weighted compression training gear, sir. Standard issue for human military personnel assigned to reduced gravity environments. She bent down and picked it up with one hand, holding it out. 60 kilograms. We wear them continuously to maintain our Earth normal strength while operating in lower gravity. This station runs at 0.7 standard G, so without compensation training, we would lose significant muscle mass and bone density over time. She tossed the vest to one of the Krellian students, who caught it reflexively and immediately staggered under the weight. 60 kilos, she repeated. I've been walking around with that for 3 weeks, sir. It's why I moved kind of stiff earlier. Takes concentration to handle normal movement when you're effectively 30% heavier than you should be. Draxel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Humans train in reduced gravity with added weight to maintain homeworld strength levels? Yes, sir. Standard protocol. We've been doing it since the early days of our space program, before we even met any of you. Can't very well go to Luna or Mars and come back weaker than we left, can we? Bad for readiness. She smiled, and it was not a particularly friendly expression. You asked about measurement parameters earlier. I was wondering if your human striking force estimates were measured at Earth gravity or station gravity. Because if they were measured here at 0.7 G, without knowing about compensation training, your numbers would be quite a bit off. How far off? Draxel asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Well, sir, I personally trained for 2 years at the Olympus Mons facility on Mars. We run that facility at 1.4 Earth gravities. I've been training in high gravity conditions and then operating in reduced gravity with added weight to maintain my adaptations. She began stretching in earnest now, her movements controlled and precise. So when you asked me to hit you with my full strength while I'm operating at 0.7 G without my weighted vest, you're effectively asking me to hit you with about twice what you think I'm capable of. Twice, Draxel repeated slowly. Give or take? She settled into a stance that he recognized as human boxing form. Weight on the balls of her feet, hands raised, body side on to reduce her target profile. Still want me to not hold back, sir? pride warred with sudden uncertainty in Draxel's mind. He had spent 12 years building his reputation on physical dominance and educational honesty. He had invited her to strike him. The entire hall was watching. If he backed down now, he would undermine everything he had established. Besides, she was still human. Even if her strength was double what he had estimated, that would still only put her in the 800 to 200-pound force range. He could handle that easily. This was just a minor recalculation, not a fundamental revision of combat theory. I insist, Lieutenant. He deliberately settled into a casual defensive posture, one arm raised, the other at his side. Your full strength. This is still an educational exercise. Yes, sir. Kira closed the distance with explosive speed that was definitely not what he had expected. 3 steps, her rear leg driving forward, her hips rotating, her shoulder coming through, her arm extending in a perfectly executed straight right cross, aimed at his solar plexus equivalent. Draxel had time to recognize that her form was flawless, that her speed was significantly higher than his estimates, and that he had made a very serious miscalculation. Then her fist connected. The impact was educational. If by educational one meant it taught Draxel several things simultaneously. That his estimates of human strength were catastrophically wrong. That his dermis was not actually impervious to physical trauma. That his respiratory system could be shocked into temporary shutdown. That his massive body could indeed achieve flight without mechanical assistance, and that walls, even reinforced ones, hurt significantly when you hit them at high velocity. He experienced approximately 1.3 seconds of airborne travel time, during which his primary thought was a single, elongated profanity in his native language. He impacted the wall, 23 feet from where he had been standing, his back hitting the reinforced surface with enough force to crack the structural padding. He slid down to the floor, landing in a seated position that would have been dignified if not for the fact that he was gasping like a malfunctioning atmospheric processor. The combat assessment hall was completely silent, except for the sound of Draxel's labored breathing and a faint ringing from the wall impact point. Kira stood in the center of the ring, looking at her fist with an expression of mild concern. She walked over to where Draxel sat, her footsteps echoing in the silence. "Sir? Are you okay?" "I pulled that punch at the last second. Didn't want to crack your ribs." Draxel tried to respond, but his respiratory system was still rebooting. He managed a wheezing sound that might have been words in some language, though probably not any language actually spoken by sentient species. The medical team arrived with the speed of people who were very good at their jobs and very used to training accidents. They surrounded him with scanners, their equipment beeping and chirping as they assessed the damage. 3 cracked ribs, the lead medic announced. A Krellian with extensive cybernetic enhancements and the bedside manner of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Severe respiratory shock, heavy bruising across the thoracic cavity, possible concussion from the wall impact. She looked at Kira with what might have been professional curiosity or might have been alarm. With Krellians, it was hard to tell. "What did you hit him with?" "My fist." Kira held up the appendage in question. "Just my fist." "Just your fist," the medic repeated flatly. She made notes on her scanner. "I'm going to need to review the hall's recording system for medical documentation." "Of course." They loaded Draxel onto a mobile support platform, his dignity suffering more damage than his body. As they prepared to transport him to the medical facility, he managed to focus his eyes on Kira. "How?" he croaked. She knelt down beside the platform, her expression genuinely apologetic. "Sir, you were right about the physics. High-gravity worlds do produce stronger organisms. But you made one calculation error." "What error?" You assumed I was adapted to station gravity. I'm not. I'm adapted to 1.4 times Earth gravity and maintaining that adaptation through constant loaded training in a 0.7 G environment. She gestured to the weighted vest still lying on the floor. Effectively, I've been doing strength training with an 85-kilogram handicap for 3 weeks. You told me to take off the weight and hit you with everything I had. So I did. Understanding and horror competed for dominance on Draxel's face. You train in higher gravity, with added weight, in lower gravity, to maintain enhanced strength? It's not enhanced, sir. It's compensatory. We're just trying not to lose our edge when we operate in space for extended periods. She patted his shoulder carefully, probably aware that anything more forceful might cause additional injury. The medical team here is excellent. You'll be fine in a week or so. And honestly, sir, thank you. That was very educational for everyone. They wheeled him away, leaving Kira standing alone in the center of the combat assessment hall, with 22 stunned students and approximately 100 observers who were going to have some very interesting conversations about what they had just witnessed. The head of the Interstellar Defense Institute's combat division, a grizzled Theronian named Commander Draxel, who had lost 3 of his 4 arms in various conflicts and replaced them with cybernetics that looked deliberately intimidating, made his way down from the observation gallery. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was more machine than organic tissue, but who had retained enough biological components to feel pain and chose to ignore it. "Lieutenant Vance," he said as he approached. Kira immediately came to attention. "Sir?" "At ease." Draxel studied her with optical implants that probably saw more than biological eyes ever could. "In 37 years of military service, I have witnessed exactly 4 training demonstrations that resulted in the instructor requiring medical evacuation. All 4 were considered significant learning experiences, though typically for the student rather than the instructor. Sir, I apologize. I should have better calibrated." He held up one cybernetic hand. "You followed orders. Instructor Morvon told you to use your full strength. You complied. He made assumptions based on incomplete data. A dangerous habit for any soldier, and a particularly dangerous habit for an instructor who should know better." He turned to address the assembled students, his voice carrying without need for amplification because his vocal augmentations made sure of it. "What you witnessed here is not a failure of Instructor Morvon's teaching methodology. He remains one of the finest combat instructors in this facility. What you witnessed is a demonstration of a fundamental military principle. Never assume you understand an opponent's capabilities without complete information." Draxel looked back at Kira. "Lieutenant, I'm transferring you from Advanced Combat Certification to the Instructor Development Program. Report to Training Section 7 tomorrow at 0600 station time. Bring your weighted vest. I suspect your methodology will be of interest to several departments." "Sir, I'm not qualified to—" "You just hospitalized a Corvathian combat master with a single punch. I think we can waive some of the prerequisites." He paused, then added, "You're also going to give a presentation to the entire instructor corps on human compensatory training protocols. Consider it penance for traumatizing half the student body." The following weeks involved a cascade of revelations, recalculations, and revised assessments that rippled through the Institute and outward into the wider galactic military community. The footage of Kira's punch was analyzed by physics departments at 9 different universities. The consensus was that she had generated approximately down 400 pounds of force, nearly as much as a Theronian, substantially more than a human should theoretically be capable of, and entirely consistent with someone adapted to high gravity and operating in reduced gravity without compensatory loading. Research teams descended on the Earth Coalition's training facilities like academic locusts, documenting the human compensatory training programs that had been standard operating procedure for nearly a century. Humans, it turned out, had been dealing with a reduced gravity problem since their earliest space stations. They had developed weighted suits, high-gravity training facilities, and rigorous protocols to ensure their personnel didn't lose strength during space deployments. They had published papers about it in their own journals, built entire training facilities around it, and assumed everyone else was doing something similar. Nobody had asked them about it, so they had never explained it. The realization spread. Every human strength assessment conducted in reduced gravity without accounting for compensatory training had been wrong. Every combat evaluation, every physical capability estimate, every assumption about human limitations, wrong, wrong, wrong. Instructors who had spent years dismissing human capabilities suddenly found themselves reviewing their data with uncomfortable urgency. Several research departments began studying whether other species could adopt similar training protocols. 3 separate military branches immediately implemented pilot programs to test gravitational compensation training with their own personnel. Draxel recovered after 8 days, though he walked with a slight limp for several weeks that he initially attributed to old injuries before finally admitting was psychosomatic. He returned to teaching with a substantially revised curriculum that included a 4-hour lecture series on environmental adaptation factors and the critical importance of complete data in threat assessment. His students found him noticeably more humble, which most agreed was an improvement, though some missed his earlier swagger. His book went into emergency revision with an entirely new chapter titled The Adaptation Variable: Why Evolution is Only Half the Equation. It became required reading in military academies across 7 species educational systems and sparked heated academic debates that continued for years. Kira's presentation on human compensatory training methodology, titled Maintaining Operational Readiness in Variable Gravity Environments, Protocols and Applications, was attended by standing room-only crowds and subsequently published in the Journal of Military Xenophysiology. She delivered it wearing her weighted vest, which several attendees noted made the whole thing more credible because she was literally demonstrating the concept while explaining it. The betting pools from that first day paid out at ratios that made several students wealthy enough to consider early retirement, though most stayed in the program because they had joined the military specifically to experience the kind of unexpected chaos that kept life interesting. 6 months later, Kira had been promoted to junior instructor status and was teaching a course called Adaptive Combat Methods in Variable Gravity Environments. Her classes included students from 23 different species, all of them eager to learn whether they could apply similar training principles to their own physiology. Early results suggested that most species could benefit from some form of gravitational compensation training, though humans seem particularly well suited to it because of their physiological adaptability and their cultural enthusiasm for making themselves uncomfortable in the name of improvement. Draxel occasionally guest lectured in her classes, telling the story of their first encounter with self-deprecating humor that his students found both entertaining and educational. He and Kira had developed an unlikely professional friendship based on mutual respect and the shared understanding that sometimes the best teachers are the ones who admit they were wrong. The Interstellar Defense Institute revised its admission policies to include mandatory gravitational adaptation assessments for all students, with special attention paid to species known for compensatory training practices. The number of human students admitted to advanced combat programs increased substantially, and their success rate improved dramatically once instructors stopped underestimating them. The galactic military community, for its part, learned several valuable lessons from the incident. First, environmental adaptation was as important as evolutionary adaptation. Second, Assumptions based on incomplete data could get you hurt. Third, humans were physically unremarkable, but had a disturbing talent for compensating for their limitations through sheer stubborn ingenuity. And fourth, never ever tell a human not to hold back unless you are absolutely certain you understand what they are capable of. The betting pools, naturally, started taking wagers on which species would be the next to demonstrate unexpected capabilities through creative training protocols. The smart money was on the Selkarians, who had recently started experimenting with pressure variation training that let them operate in both aquatic and terrestrial environments with equal proficiency. Several instructors had already declined to participate in demonstration matches with Selkarian volunteers, having learned their lesson from Draxel's experience. Commander Brechtal, watching all of this unfold from his administrative office, found himself feeling something resembling satisfaction. The Institute existed to train warriors, yes, but it also existed to challenge assumptions, to push boundaries, and to occasionally humble people who had gotten too comfortable in their expertise. The fact that a human lieutenant had accomplished all three goals with a single punch was, in his opinion, exactly the kind of educational experience that made his job worthwhile. He made a note in his personal log. Recommend increased focus on species-specific adaptation training. Recommend comprehensive review of all baseline assessments for accuracy. Recommend hazard pay for instructors who volunteer for demonstration matches with species known for compensatory training protocols. And then, because he was a warrior at heart, despite his administrative duties, he added, "The galaxy is still